Alright, well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. For people just now tuning in, we welcome you into a new episode of the GFL Podcast. I will be your host, the Cowboy Crab, and on today's episode, with Football Fusion still being down, I have decided to recap Week 8 and go on to a preview of Week 9 and give some of my predictions for Week 9. But before we do that, I'm going to give a little bit of a detour real quick. As you probably noticed, I was not online at all this weekend. I was working on a personal project of myself. I got to start. I got Friday and Saturday to set it up. Sunday's when I actually did it, and then Monday I had technical difficulties with it, so it took me all night. It took me all night to get the stuff fixed. But now everything is fixed, and I am officially done with it. But anyway, let's get into the recaps. We're going to start with college, and we will go to the NFL, and then we will go back to college for the preview of Week 9, and then we go to Week 9, the preview of the NFL, and then I'll give my predictions on some of the Week 9 games. Starting off with college. A forfeit win for USC over Alabama, a forfeit win for Wisconsin over North Carolina, a forfeit win for LSU over Cincinnati, and a forfeit win for Wake Forest over Ole Miss. Notre Dame wins 48-41 over Boise State. Florida gets a forfeit win over Oregon. Virginia Tech gets a forfeit win over Penn State. Pitt gets a forfeit win over Iowa. Oklahoma wins 45-13 over West Virginia. Baylor gets a forfeit win over Stanford. South Carolina gets a forfeit win over Purdue. BYU and Clemson go to a double forfeit loss. Georgia gets a forfeit win over Ohio State. Auburn gets a forfeit win over Iowa State. UCLA wins 70-68 over Michigan. Good God, what is defense? Washington gets a forfeit win over Utah. And Maryland gets a forfeit win over Texas A&M. Texas wins 56-33 over Coastal Carolina. Arkansas wins 60-32 over Kentucky. Arizona State gets a 58-7 win over Michigan State. Good God, that was a blowout. And your last game, college Week 8 game, Oklahoma State gets a 57-25 win over Tennessee. And now we move on to the NFL. For the scores. Oh boy, oh god. I'm not going to enjoy reading this. Double forfeit loss for Atlanta and Buffalo. Jacksonville gets a forfeit win over Detroit. The Colts get a forfeit win over the Bears. The Giants get a forfeit win over the Buccaneers. Chargers get a forfeit win over the Ravens. Navy gets a forfeit win over Army. The Niners get a forfeit win over the Chiefs. Eagles get a forfeit win over the Cowboys. Broncos get a forfeit win over the Jets. Saints get a forfeit win over the Bengals. Browns get a forfeit win over the Rams. Titans get a forfeit win over the Dolphins. Good God, that is a lot of forfeits. I think there's only one more after this. Raiders get an 89-24 victory over the Packers. Okay. Panthers win 56-46 over the Steelers. Patriots get a forfeit win over the Vikings. Seattle, in the lightest way to put it, took a shotgun to the face of the Texans, 71-35. And the Cardinals win 47-35 over the football team. Oh my good God. Oh God, I just can't get over the amount of forfeit wins. I think there was more forfeit wins and losses in the NFL the actual times that teams actually. Yeah, there was. What, 5 total games had final scores? And what, in college there is. 1, 2, 6. I think I counted that right. 6 total games that had final scores. Well, Jesus Christ, that's a lot of forfeits. Nothing else to say besides, good God, that's a lot. But now, I will do a preview for week 9 in college, and then the week 9 in the NFL. And I'll do some of the predictions on some of the big games. So this week, alright, this is alright. D11, D12, Bearcats versus Broncos, Bulldogs versus Badgers, Clemson. You have the Clemson Tigers versus North Carolina, Michigan State versus Tennessee, D13 versus D14, Buckeyes versus Crimson Tide, Gators versus Hurricanes, Trojans versus Cougars, Virginia Tech versus the Oregon Ducks, Auburn Tigers versus the Hawkeyes, Penn State versus Iowa State, Battle of the States there, Washington versus Pitt, Seminoles versus the Longhorns, Utah D17 versus D18, Utah versus Mississippi State, Oklahoma versus Baylor, Maryland versus Stanford, A&M versus Coastal Carolina. D19 versus D19, Wake Forest versus West Virginia, Minnesota versus Ole Miss, and lastly, D20 versus D21, the bottom of the barrel matches, I would like to say. You have Arkansas versus UCLA, Kentucky versus Michigan, Louisville versus Purdue, and TCU versus South Carolina. Now, I think there's promotional games this week. Let me just check real quick. Yeah, there is. Alright, that's fine. So, top of college this week's got promotional games against the bottom of the NFL. I'll get to those when we go to the NFL. But these D11 versus D12 games could look interesting, I will not lie. As, honest in my opinion, the biggest college versus college match this week is probably Cincinnati and Boise State. Probably is, or Georgia versus Wisconsin. That one of those games is probably your college versus college game of the weeks, if I had to be honest. But if I had to give my predictions on them, I would say Cincinnati's winning, I think Wisconsin's winning, Clemson's winning, and Michigan State is winning. Then we go to D13 and 14. I will say Ohio State's winning. We'll say Miami is winning. We'll say USC and BYU. I'm like 90% sure most of these teams have forfeit wins, so it's really hard to tell. But I'll go with BYU over USC. And then I'll go Oregon over Virginia Tech. 15 versus 16. I got Iowa winning. I'll have Iowa State winning. Both Iowas for no reason whatsoever. I'll have Pittsburgh winning, and then I'll have Texas winning. D17 versus 18. I will have Utah winning. I will have Baylor winning. Stanford winning. And then I'll have Coastal Carolina winning. D19 versus 19. I'm going to have Wake Forest and Ole Miss win. D20 versus 21. I'm going to have Arkansas, Michigan, and Louisville, and South Carolina. I just hope to God these games go back. These games don't have as many forfeit wins, because if they do, good God. Well, that's whenever Fusion gets back up, or whatever game we're going to next, because there are no game times for any upcoming games. But now we will go to the NFL, where starting out the week, you have primetime games, but I'm going to start at the bottom and save those for last. The promotional games this week, you have Navy versus Notre Dame, Army versus LSU, Air Force versus Oklahoma State, and the Houston Oilers versus Arizona State. This might be because these teams are new, and I don't think a single person has seen them play that's not from these teams. But I'm going with all the college teams here. I mean, I don't think anyone that's listening right now, or going to be watching the recording of this later, or listening to the recording later, whatever, is going to disagree. I don't think a single person's going to disagree with me going with every college team. I'm being honest. I don't think any of these NFL teams even play. I don't think they've played a game. No, they haven't. Because Air Force and the Oilers got canceled, and Navy won via forfeit. Not a single person has seen the new NFL teams play. And with that being my reasoning, I'm going Notre Dame, LSU, Oklahoma State, and Arizona State. Moving on to D6 versus D8. You have the Dolphins versus Ravens. You have the football team versus Kansas City. You have Houston versus Green Bay. And you have the New York Jets versus the Buffalo Bills. D5 versus D7. I think I did predictions early for the promotional games, but technically they're college games too. D5 versus 7. You have Dallas versus San Francisco. Cincinnati versus Vegas. Chicago versus Atlanta. And Tampa Bay versus the Chargers. D3 versus D4, you have Cleveland versus Detroit, Jacksonville versus Pittsburgh, Carolina versus Minnesota, and New England versus the Rams. And finally, your primetime games for this week. You have Seattle versus Philadelphia. Good to see the Seahawks in D1 as a Seahawks fan. You have the Broncos versus the Giants, Titans versus Colts, and let's be fair here, everybody. This is probably the biggest game of the year so far, what the game I'm about to mention. Cardinals versus Saints 2. Their Week 4 matchup, their official replay is still up on my channel. I've not taken it down, and it will not be taken down. So you can go back and watch that game if you want to get a good idea. I think there's also a hype game that somebody made. Let me check real quick. Yeah. I think, Hell or Tolly, I don't know. But if you go in the YouTube section of this Discord, you'll see the hype trailer for Saints versus Cardinals too. But potentially biggest game of the year, probably, maybe. Now I'm gonna go into my predictions. Already did for promotional games. D6 versus D8. I'm going with Baltimore. I'm going to go with Washington. I'm going to go with Houston. And I'm going to go with the Jets. Houston, I'm going to be honest here, folks. They need a bounce-back game. And this is the kind of game they need. Going up against Green Bay, they need a bounce-back game, for the love of God. 71 points put up against them last week. Let me remind you, 71 points. So yeah, no, good God, they need a win. D5 versus 7, Cowboys and Niners. I'm going to go with the Niners, Bengals, and Raiders. Bengals have fallen off. Bengals have completely fallen off. You can't. Hey, chat. I remember, what was it, week 3 and 4 when they were D2 and maybe D1. And at some point they just fell off the face of the earth. Yeah, I'm going to the Raiders. Bears versus Falcons. I'm going to go with the Bears, and then Bucks versus Chargers. I'm going to go with the Chargers. D3 versus D4. We have Cleveland versus Detroit. I'm going to go with Cleveland. Jacksonville versus Pittsburgh. This might be a shocker, but I'm going with Pittsburgh. My reasoning is I saw how Jacksonville played against Carolina. I think it was Carolina. Let me fact check that real quick. It's Carolina or... Oh, it was Tennessee. No, it was Houston. That's who they played. I was close. I was close. Wasn't exactly there, but I was close. I saw they played against Houston. I mean, they looked like they had it through most of the game. They still lost, but I still think Pittsburgh's had a chance. Carolina versus Minnesota. I'm going Carolina. New England versus LA. The Patriots. They're making moves. They're starting to rise up in the rankings, and I think they got it this week. And lastly, your primetime games for this week. I'm going to start Seattle and Philadelphia. Seattle, they're winning it. No, sir. No doubt in my mind. Seattle, you put up 71 points last week. If you guys don't win, I'm going to look stupid. More stupid than I already look. Denver versus the Giants. Denver, okay. I don't think I've seen either of these teams play. But, oh boy. I think I'm going to go with Denver. You got Tennessee and Indianapolis. Titans. Please, for the love of God, win. Please. I believe in you guys. I believe that game against the Cardinals, you guys would have won. If you didn't decide to be stupid. Just for the love of God, beat the Colts. Beat the Indianapolis Colts. And if my next game's alright, you guys should at least be staying at number 2. You might move to number 1. But the final game, Arizona, New Orleans, Saints. I'm going with the Saints. My reasoning is, get this. The Saints had the Cardinals for the first half. They had them to the wire. They had a big lead. They let them come back, of course. But I believe in them. Also, not to mention that this is not the original Cardinals team. This is the new Cardinals team. Last week, I'm pretty sure the only reason they won is because they faced Washington. They faced a D6 team. This week, they got to go up against somebody that people are considering on their level. If you look at the rankings. That's New Orleans. So, I go with the Saints. Saints are moving up to D1. Depending on how the Titans do, they're probably taking number 1 or they might take number 2. But hey, well, all of this will be figured out. Will be known eventually. And right now, I think the only thing everyone wants is for Fusion to come back at some point. Or we figure out what game we're going to so we can all do this game. Start week 9, have more fun. But I have got nothing else left to say. I've got nobody that wants to volunteer to speak, so for the GFL media team, I am the Cowboy Crap. I thank everyone for tuning in the audience, and I hope to see you all on week 9, and goodbye.